As was mentioned in the introduction to the liturgy and in our opening prayer today, we join the Universal Church in celebrating the solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul. And I was reminded of the years when I was studying for the priesthood. During my 8 years in the seminary, my best friend's name was Paul. And so each year on the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul, we would celebrate with a special holy hour. I still get those mixed up sometimes. Other than Jesus himself, Peter and Paul were the most influential leaders, builders, and architects of the early church. No one else came even close. And so let's first go back to take a look at who Peter and Paul were before they encountered Jesus. And we get a good picture of that from the New Testament scriptures. Other than Jesus, there is more written about Peter and Paul than anyone else in the New Testament. In many ways, they were about the most unlikely, improbable candidates to be chosen for the special roles they played in the development of the early church. They were not exactly on what you might call a spiritual path. No one was asking them to pose for holy cards. In Peter, we have an uneducated man of the earth, man of the sea. He was a fisherman. He was strong-willed and pragmatic, yet very impetuous and vulnerable. And we get a glimpse of his excitable personality in that dramatic scene when Jesus calls upon him to walk on water. And Peter has what today we would call a meltdown. Peter was also the disciple who would deny Jesus 3 times, and yet Peter is the one Jesus called the rock, as we just heard in our gospel, and he would become the foundation and first head of the church. Paul, on the other hand, was born into wealth and influence. He was a well-educated rabbi, and yet he did the unthinkable. He made sport of persecuting Christians, Jesus' first followers. So deep was his despise of new Christians that he sought to eliminate them completely, until suddenly Paul undergoes a dramatic conversion, and he would soon become the most successful, prolific, and influential ambassador of Christ in the early church. The success of his missionary efforts went unparalleled, and his writings, the letters of St. Paul, make up a significant part of the New Testament, and still today are read and revered by Christians throughout the world. So clearly, these 2 men could not have been more different, nor was there any indication that they were destined for sainthood. They had imperfections and more than likely were keenly aware of and ashamed of some of their failures and inadequacies. But seemingly, at a certain point in their life, they came to the realization that they were not fulfilling the purpose that God had in mind for them. And that's what makes their story so fascinating. God never gave up on them. God never wrote them off or considered them beyond redemption. And therein lies an important lesson that we can learn today about our own lives. Who among us seems to be destined for sainthood? Who among us is not keenly aware of our own weaknesses and failures and inadequacies? And who among us is in some way not living up to our full potential, or mindful of the fact that we're not fully fulfilling God's purpose for our lives? But what we see in the lives of Peter and Paul, and this applies to us, is that the grace of God can transform the hearts and minds of anyone who remains open to that grace. And those very same individuals can become extremely effective disciples. Clearly, God can do and use anyone, anytime, in any way to accomplish his purposes, no matter how unlikely or unworthy they might appear to be to others. Apparently, God sees what others do not see. For Paul, it was only when he was brought to his knees that he became open to what the power of God could do through him. And for Peter, just try to imagine that night after the Last Supper. Peter had previously and publicly professed his love for Jesus, not once, not twice, but 3 times. But then after the Last Supper, just moments after Jesus had washed the disciples' feet, just moments after he revealed himself in the breaking of the bread, Jesus is suddenly taken hostage by the temple guards, and at a time when Jesus would need loyalty and friendship more than ever, Peter denies him 3 times. And so we can just imagine the shame and the remorse that must have filled his heart. And yet that same Peter would be the recipient of an act of forgiveness and mercy that only Jesus was capable of offering. And not only does he forgive Peter, but he does what at first glance seems to be unfathomable. He declares Peter the rock, the foundation on which he would build his church, and appoints him as the leader who would take his church into the future. But who better to be an extension of the forgiveness and mercy of the Lord than one who has been the recipient of that themselves? And so that being said, what about us? Can we not see something of ourselves in Peter and Paul? How often in our own lives do we tend to get fixated on what is lacking in us rather than what we do have and who we truly are? We focus upon our weaknesses and sinful inclinations rather than our gifts and strengths, or on what we do wrong rather than what we do right or well. And yet part of the mystery of God's grace is that there is no darkness or evil within us that is stronger than or beyond the power of God's transforming love. Even when we can see nothing more than our imperfections and what we lack, God is still seeking ways to bring life and grace and goodness into our lives. And God is able to do that simply because He is God. We are sitting here right now because we are the beneficiaries of a long history of men and women like Peter and Paul who have passed their faith on to us. And it is our collective responsibility to preserve and to pass on what we've been given to the generations to come. Our young people today, more than ever, need our guidance, direction, good example, and the values that come through gospel living. We can't pass on something that we are not committed to learning about more fervently and living out more faithfully. Our young people deserve the best we have to offer them. And so today we celebrate 2 great pillars of the church, Peter and Paul, whom we can all relate to in some way. Imperfect indeed, but who somehow responded to a gentle yet unmistakable call from God. We all share in their mission to spread the good news. We might not always feel as though we're up to the task, but the essential truth we celebrate today is this: Christ built and continues to build the church and make His kingdom known through fragile, unremarkable human beings, simple men and women of faith just like you and me.